Hey all, welcome to the first actual module of ENGG 481. I'm your host Lauren.
And of course, I'm your co-host Jet. Today we're going to get the gears turning a bit to discuss societal impact and what it all means for engineers.
There's a question that you're going to get asked a lot during this course, in, some kind of shape or form. What is, or was, or will be the impact of blah technology in relation to society? So today in Module 1, we're going to provide one possible way to break down the term society and look at one possible framework for talking about impact and influence. We're also going to touch on why this course is valuable for engineers.
So Lauren, I don't really get what society is. I mean, I'm a robot. And lots of what I read from everyday speech on the internet kind of sounds like a synonym for everyone or the world. Is this definition going to do?
Of course, you can interpret society and the measures of impact many different ways. But one thing I noticed when reading hundreds of papers over the course of my involvement with this course is that honestly, the concept of society might be a little on the back burner of students' minds and in conversations. And in many cases, students would refer to society interchangeably with world. I mean, understandably so. I know I used to wake up with calculus on my mind when I was in third year, fourth year. So society wasn't really at the forefront of my mind, that's for sure. But to avoid the more vague surface discussions on the impacts on society, I thought in our first module we should start off by prompting you guys to think from the very get-go about what society means and ways we can discuss and measure impact. So let's look at a way to break it down. How could we look at a technology and slice and dice it in relation to society? What are the facets, the intricacies of this thing we call society? I mentioned in class, engineering education is kind of regulated by the Canadian Engineering Accreditation Board. And honestly, one of the reasons that this course exists is to develop one of the 12 particular attributes desired for engineering students. It's actually the one about understanding the impact on society and the environment. So let's start there to get the gears turning. We can look at the definition of this attribute to get some tangible ways to break down what is society. The CEAB, the Canadian Engineering Accreditation Board, says that an engineering student should have an ability to analyze societal and environmental aspects of engineering activities. Such ability includes an understanding of the interactions that engineering has with the economic, legal, health, safety, and cultural aspects of society, the uncertainties in the predictions of such interactions, and the concepts of sustainable design development and environmental stewardship. Man, that's a mouthful, but at least we've got something good to work with. All that reading that I know you're totally caught up with right now? Well, why don't we use this definition and use these aspects of society as a starting point? So, while you're in class taking notes or doing your readings, you can put this into practice. So every time you see or hear mentions of economic implications or legal, health, safety, cultural, or environmental aspects of society, definitely this is a good place to start having a little bell go off in your head so that we can begin to get in the habit of thinking deeper about those tangible aspects of society. And of course, you're all critical thinkers, so perhaps you can see even more aspects and facets of this thing we call society that you would like to add to the list. Does that work for you, Jert?
Well, that kind of works for me. I get a good feel for at least one way we could break down society. But Lauren, we're talking about impact too, so what's up with impact? How would you go about that?
So I went to talk to this guy, Houston Peschel. He's an MBA prof here at the U of C. Pretty well-known dude in the city. He's like one of Calgary's 40 under 40 and whatnot. He specializes in the MBA program in teaching about sustainability, social responsibility, and entrepreneurship. Anyways, he gave me some food for thought with regard to discussing and measuring impact. I looked into it more, and I I think this thing called theory of change makes for a great framework for us to talk about impact on society. So, Jert, what do you think? How might we measure societal impacts?
Well, in the economic and technical sense of the word impact, it's easy for me to understand as a computer. Impact is measured in numbers, dollars, cents, etc. But I'm not sure how the heck we would measure impact on society. What would I measure? Happiness, quality of life. Those measurements are a little wishy-washy for me at the moment.
Well, the theory of change is often used to report by governments or social enterprises where their organizations are focusing on making a difference in the social sphere, and when they want to explain the impact of the difference they are making. For example, to explain how much of an impact that vaccinations are having on society, or affordable housing efforts, or maybe, dare I say it, something like carbon pricing. Anyways, yes, Jared, it can get down to a quantitative comfort zone where impact can also be measured as a number. For example, for every X dollars invested in vaccinations, our healthcare system is saving Y amount of dollars spent on hospital and other emergency services. We just have to talk about getting the metrics right. I think this could provide a good starting framework for our course and our uses too. Although we may not be calculating exact impact numbers, but the concept of the levels of impact paint a pretty good picture for interpreting and discussing technology in relation to society. Every action has a reaction, like a puddle in a pond, but how far the reaction reaches and the full impact is not always on the radar of technology influencers, or even fully known altogether. These layers in the theory of change provide a perfect lens from which to view impact. So, there are the three levels to discuss change. Output is the first level. It's usually pretty easy to state. An effort was made, a solution was presented. But just because a technology exists and it sounds like an impactful idea, like clocks were introduced to the public sphere, so what? Just because the effort has been made, vaccinations exist, how does this translate? Well, the second level talks about metrics that indicate an effort actually made an impact. Usually here, we are talking about the direct impact on people who interface with the technology in some way. And it's over a shorter period of time, maybe talking on a scale of years or so. For example, with clocks, meetings become easier. People could measure how much time they spend working. Then we get to the last level. This is a bit more extrapolated and talks about the impact on society at large. It's called the influence, where change can be felt by indirect users of the technology. It's definitely something harder to tie down, but a critical element to consider. For example, the influences of clock technology may have contributed to the cultural norms around the workday and labor laws. Impact might be a little bit easier to see, but when we're talking about influence, you'll definitely have to practice using your critical thinking ability here. So let's take a look at another example from a student project in 481 in a past class, not from Dr. Eds. And we'll use our adaptation of this theory of change. This is a project where the students did a pitch and they talked about the impacts of hands-free cell phone technology. And they did a good job at talking about both the surface impacts and the greater influences on society. Let's start with the output. Well, this is the technological solution created, the hands-free technology itself. Now, what about the impact of this technology? Well, the impact is on those more directly related to the technology, and one of the impacts talked about is in the safety dimension by a reduction of incidents and deaths related to distracted driving. And there was also a mention of financial implications indicated by a decrease in insurance claims. And they even touched on the environmental implications of this technology with regard to waste and spills associated with collisions. Now, what about the influence of this technology on society at large? Well, They mentioned a reduced load on the healthcare system and the emergency response systems. Of course, this analysis presented here could be presented in a more exhaustive way, or you might even have your own take on this example, but I think you get the picture and how we might use this theory of change.
Okay, I understand now. I might not be measuring happiness per se, but I might be measuring a reduced number of accidents. So, in general, when you guys are looking at technology, you can practice thinking about what particular facets of society are relating to the technology. Also, you can pay attention to the change in society by referring to immediate impact and then more deeper levels of influence.
I think you're getting the hang of things, Jert. Alright, so let's take a few minutes to talk about what this all means to engineers in specific. So sure, the CEAB, the Canadian Engineering Accreditation Board, says that engineers should understand the impact on society and the environment. But let's ask a few questions like why? Since when? How does it come about? And was it always a part of being an engineer? In a journey to answer these questions, I found that there are two important notes why understanding societal impacts, especially right now, is important to 21st century engineers. The first note is our profession's quest for a professional status. And the second note is the momentum that characterizes the 21st century. The quest for a professional status is the root of where codes of conduct start popping up, which often declare us to act first and foremost in the interest of the public and hold the public paramount, etc. We can see that professionals, for example, doctors, lawyers, and arguably engineers, seek professional status separate from other occupations due to a specialized skill set and rigorous ethical obligations and other criteria. As the book The Engineer in History states, for professionals, there is a presumed competence, integrity, and social responsibility, which ultimately means that society trusts us. And Canadian engineers seem to be taking the quest for professional recognition pretty seriously based on the criteria that this book outlines. We certainly employ rigor in our specialized training. For example, the accreditation is required for all engineering education programs. We definitely employ self-governance, and we do reserve the title engineer, and we typically enjoy a higher prestige and pay. However, it is the last criteria that hinders our profession from obtaining full public trust, full belief in us as professionals who serve society. That requirement is the freedom of action and ability to exercise our specialized skills autonomously without influence from the organization we work for or other external influences. Now, it may take time and even debate to work through that particular criteria on the pursuit of a professional status, but as long as we desire to maintain professional status and we are acting first and foremost in the best interest of society, it becomes critical to know how to think deeper about the impacts of our technological work on society. The second reason why understanding the impact on society has become so relevant, aside from the engineering specific aspects, is the momentum in the 21st century. Many reports illustrate the challenges of the 21st century, and one even calls out engineers, which is the National Academy of Engineering report on the grand challenges for engineers of the 21st century. And many of these challenges have a central theme: sustainable, responsible development. Each century may be characterized by its own challenges and its own relationship to technology. What led the 21st century to concentrate so much on responsible development and sustainable progress? Let me ask you a few questions to set the stage. So, as a base point, what do you think the population is right now in the world, approximately? If you guessed 7.4 billion or so, you're right. Could you make a guess on what the world population was in early 1800s, around 1804? Well, It took all of human existence until 1804 to reach only 1 billion people. Now, how about mid 1900s and 1960? This is kind of the time of our parents or even our bosses' generation. 3 billion. Think about that. In one or so generations, we have more than doubled the entire world and then some. And now we are adding a billion or so every 12 years. You can see that our rapid growth spurt in the 1900s is why the 20th century is sometimes referred to as the Great Acceleration or the human-dominated era, as you can read in the referenced article from the National Geographic. They point out, as you can see in this image, a scientist who has come up with a calculation metric for calculating generalized impact on the world of technology. It's called the IPAT. Impact equals population multiplied by affluence multiplied by technology, IPAT. Woohoo! Another way to think about impact. Another bonus framework. Anyways, although some could argue that this calculation might be a bit oversimplified measure of representing this interconnected web of society, technology, and impact, there's definitely still some perspective that we can take away from this calculation and this interpretation. Don't you think this paints a clear picture why all of a sudden our resource use has become part of the utmost concern? Think about it. We have the same, if not less, amount of resources and an accelerating pace of human growth. No wonder there are tones of sustainable development rising to urgency and reports calling on professionals who have a big stake in problem solving and decision making in the 21st century for people like us, like engineers. Now, before we end the podcast with some practical notes, I have one more question for you. So we've discussed society and impact, so we kind of have our bases covered for meeting the CAB attribute. But one more, how about sustainable development? What comes to mind automatically when you think of sustainability or sustainable development? What do you think? Well, for me, I know notions of eco-friendly, greenness come to mind, and it is certainly not the more modern accepted definition of sustainability. So let's read the UN definition for sustainable development. It is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I'm not sure what you guys think, but even with all of the biases I bring to the table in my oil and gas city here, that is definitely a definition I think most of us can get on board with. What do you think? Phew, you made it through the first module of 5. Thanks for taking the time to listen to me today, and I hope you walk away with some good food for thought, and that while you're in your workshop on Friday or in lecture, even walking through your day, that some neurons begin firing off and you can start drawing on your own conclusions, your own curiosities, and begin connecting more dots in this big social techie web that we're all a part of. Till next time, my friends. Not so fast. You guys still have an assignment to do. So this assignment, number 1, consists of 3 parts. The first part is where you'll look at an example of 2 past student descriptions where they were making conclusions about impact of a technology on society. And you're going to practice providing your own insight and critique so you can get a feel for how you might be moving forward in this course when you provide your own insights. The second part is using an excerpt from the text, practicing making annotations and handwritten notes. For example, you might want to reference different aspects of society or make a note on depth or add your own experience and your own new ideas and underlying questions. Lastly, in the third part, this one's simple, but in 15 words or less, describe how you personally see the relationship between engineering, technology, and society. Be as straightforward or as crazy or as silly as you would like. And then we'll get together on Friday, January 20th, and we will talk about our assignments. So January 20th, first workshop, attendance is required. There's only 5 of these. You're going to hand in this assignment, this exercise we just talked about, at the beginning of the workshop. You get a chance to meet your group members, and we will talk about the presentations, where the first set of presentations will be the following Friday on January 27th. Thanks, everybody, and this is actually the end of the podcast.